India is entering a politically and economically sensitive phase. The government is asking citizens to prepare for restraint, but at the same time, the Prime Minister is stepping deeper into global diplomacy. That contradiction itself becomes the heart of this conversation. PM Modi embarks on 5-nation tour. After asking Indians to avoid unnecessary foreign travel, hello and welcome. At a time when millions of Indians are dealing with rising living costs, expensive fuel, uncertain global markets, and economic anxiety, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has made an appeal that caught the country's attention. Reduce fuel consumption. Avoid unnecessary foreign travel. On the surface, it sounded like a simple advisory. But politically, economically, and psychologically, it felt much bigger than that. Because when governments begin speaking the language of restraint, citizens immediately sense that difficult months may lie ahead. And then came the next development. The Prime Minister himself is embarking on a major 5-nation diplomatic tour covering the UAE, Sweden, the Netherlands, Norway, and Italy. And naturally, many Indians are asking a very direct question. If citizens are being asked to cut back, why is the government expanding international engagement at full speed? Is this contradiction, or is this actually strategy? That is where this debate becomes far more interesting. Because to understand Modi's message, one has to first understand the global environment India is operating in today. The world right now is not stable. West Asia remains volatile. Tensions involving Iran and the Strait of Hormuz continue to worry energy markets globally. And for India, this matters enormously. India imports most of its crude oil, which means every geopolitical shock abroad eventually reaches Indian households. Petrol prices rise, transport costs rise, inflation rises, household budgets shrink, the rupee comes under pressure. So when the Prime Minister asks citizens to conserve fuel or avoid unnecessary travel, this may not necessarily be ideological messaging, it may actually be precautionary economic signaling. In simple words, Delhi may already be preparing the country psychologically for a more uncertain global phase. And India is not alone. Across parts of Asia, Africa, and even Europe, governments are quietly entering what can be described as a resource discipline era. Countries are cutting unnecessary spending, reducing non-essential travel, encouraging remote work, trying to preserve energy security. Because modern economies can absorb political instability far more easily than prolonged energy shocks. Now seen from that perspective, Modi's foreign tour begins to look very different. The UAE is not just another diplomatic stop. It is critical to India's energy security architecture. Europe is not just about optics either. Sweden matters for technology. The Netherlands matters for trade and logistics. Norway matters for energy and maritime cooperation. Italy matters strategically within the European political framework. From Delhi's perspective, these visits are likely tied to investment flows, supply chains, semiconductor, partnerships, trade access, energy negotiations, and long-term geopolitical positioning. In other words, while citizens are being asked to consume less, the Indian state may actually be trying to secure more. More energy stability, more investments, more strategic partnerships, more global leverage. And this is where the politics becomes complicated, because citizens experience austerity personally. They do not experience geopolitics personally. People see expensive fuel, higher airfares, shrinking savings, costlier groceries. Governments, meanwhile, speak in the language of long-term national interest and strategic necessity. That gap creates frustration in every democracy, not just in India, everywhere. And there is another question that deserves serious attention. If these foreign visits are being projected as critical national missions, should there not also be stronger public accountability once they conclude? Should the Prime Minister return and clearly explain what India concretely achieved? What investments came in? What trade advantages were secured? What strategic agreements actually benefit ordinary Indians? because many citizens today feel that foreign visits often generate powerful headlines, dramatic visuals, and diplomatic branding, but measurable outcomes are not always clearly communicated back to the public. Supporters of the government argue that diplomacy works slowly, and that argument is fair. Many strategic gains only become visible years later. But public skepticism is also understandable, especially during periods when citizens themselves are being asked to reduce spending and exercise restraint. That is why this moment is politically delicate. This is not a lockdown era, but it may very well be the beginning of a new economic discipline era. An era where governments across the world ask citizens to consume more carefully, while states themselves become even more globally aggressive in securing energy, trade routes, investments, and strategic influence. And perhaps that is the real story here. Not whether Modi should travel, but whether governments can continue asking ordinary people to sacrifice without eventually being asked a simple question in return. What exactly did the sacrifice achieve? And perhaps even more importantly, will citizens continue accepting austerity narratives without demanding measurable outcomes from those asking them to tighten their belts? Thank you for listening. If you value sharp, independent, and deeply analytical journalism, do support HW News Network by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video.